"Pretend you are mine," the Duke of Corwin murmured against her ear, his hand closing warm and certain over hers, and Lucian Hale watched the whispering crush of wedding guests falter and turn, as the most feared man in the county claimed, before them all, the woman they had gathered to see humiliated. He had not intended to do it. Lucian Vale, 7th Duke of Corwin, had come to the Ashcombe wedding for no reason more romantic than duty. The groom was a distant connection, the breakfast was to be a grand one, and a duke who wished to keep the goodwill of the county could not well decline. He disliked weddings. He disliked crowds. He had positioned himself, as was his habit, at the margin of the great hall with a glass of wine. He did not intend to drink, counting the minutes until he might decently escape. And then he had seen her. She stood alone against the far wall, a young woman in a gown of pale yellow that had once, he suspected, been chosen with hope, and now only made her conspicuous, for every other guest seemed to have contrived some quiet cruelty at her expense. They did not speak to her. They spoke about her, behind fans and gloved hands, in the particular pitying, gloating undertone that a certain kind of society reserves for a woman it has decided to enjoy destroying. He watched a matron steer her daughter pointedly away. He watched two young men look at the woman in yellow and laugh. And he watched the woman herself stand very straight through all of it, her chin level, her hands folded, refusing to give them the collapse they so plainly craved. It took him only a moment to piece the thing together. He was a man who read a room the way other men read a newspaper. This was a jilting made public sport of. The groom, a handsome, weak-jawed young gentleman now standing radiant beside his heiress bride, had plainly once been promised to the woman in yellow, and had thrown her over for the richer match, and someone with exquisite malice had seen to it that she was invited to watch. She had come because to refuse would have been to confess the wound. She had come to prove she could not be broken, and the whole glittering company had come, in part, to watch her fail. Lucian felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt a cold, clean anger. He set down his untouched wine and crossed the hall. He was aware of the ripple that preceded him always, the sudden hush, the straightening of spines, the whispered passage of his name from mouth to mouth. The Duke of Corwin did not attend such gatherings. The Duke of Corwin did not single anyone out. And here he was, walking with unhurried menace straight toward the woman in yellow, while 100 eyes tracked him and could not imagine his purpose. He reached her. He saw her look up, startled, wary, bracing for a fresh cruelty, and he bent his dark head close, so that to the watching room it must have looked the most intimate thing in the world, and he said, very low, "Pretend you are mine. Take my arm and smile as though I have said something charming, and let us give this pack of jackals something rather different to gossip about." She did not miss a beat. Later he would think that was the first thing he loved about her, that in the worst moment of her public life, with a strange and frightening duke murmuring in her ear, she had the wit and the nerve to lift her chin, curve her mouth into a warm and private smile, and lay her hand upon his arm as though they had shared 100 such moments. "You are either very kind, your grace," she said through the smile, "or very cruel, and I confess I cannot yet tell which." "Neither at present," Lucian said. "I am merely bored and angry and disinclined to watch a room full of cowards enjoy themselves at a brave woman's expense. Walk with me. Let them look." He led her the length of the hall, past the gaping matrons and the sniggering young men and the radiant, faithless groom, and he bent his head to her and appeared to hang upon her every word, and the whispering that had been all pity turned in an instant to something else entirely: astonishment, envy, frantic recalculation. For a woman whom the great feared Duke of Corwin singled out and smiled upon was no longer a jilted nobody to be mocked. She was, suddenly, the most interesting person in the room. "Tell me your name," he said quietly, "since we are, apparently, devoted to one another." "Isolde Wren," she said, "and you have just ruined a very carefully arranged afternoon, your grace. They meant me to be humiliated. My cousin," a flicker of pain crossed her face, "my own cousin arranged the invitation. She thought it would be amusing. She is the bride's dearest friend. Then your cousin, said Lucien, is about to have a most instructive afternoon herself. He guided Isolde toward the great windows into the full warm light where the whole company might see them plainly. The gentleman at the altar, he was yours, I take it. He was promised to me, Isolde said with a quiet steadiness that cost her visibly. For 2 years, until a family with more money than mine put their daughter in his path. He did not even tell me himself in the end. I learned it from the newspaper like everyone else. And then because that was not quite enough, they saw to it that I should be asked to the wedding to prove, they said, that there were no hard feelings. Her smile for the watching room never wavered, but her eyes were bright. I came because I would not give them the satisfaction of my absence. I had thought I could bear it. I find it is harder than I suppose to stand in a room and be laughed at. You are not being laughed at now, Lucien observed. And it was true. The room had transformed around them. The groom, Lucien noted with grim satisfaction, kept casting glances toward Isolde, and the Duke glances that grew, as the hour wore on, distinctly less radiant. A man who has thrown over a woman for a richer prize does not enjoy watching a duke find her fascinating. Lucien stayed at her side through the whole of the wedding breakfast, a thing he had never done for anyone. He fetched her a plate. He drew her into the conversation of the highest-ranking guests, who now fell over themselves to be gracious to the woman the Duke of Corwenna favored. He turned upon anyone who ventured the smallest slight the flat, dark, quelling gaze that had made braver men than these lose the thread of their sentences, and the slights died in their throats unspoken. And he found, as the afternoon lengthened, that he was not acting a part at all. For Isolde Wren, once she had understood that his kindness was real, was the most delightful company he had encountered in years. Under the shelter of his protection her wit came out dry, quick, unexpected, and she made him laugh twice, genuinely, a sound so unfamiliar that the guests nearest turned to stare. She did not flatter him. She did not fawn. She teased him about his fearsome reputation and asked him, with mock gravity, whether it was true he had once made a bishop faint merely by looking at him. And Lucien, who had spent his life being feared and never once being teased, felt something long frozen in him begin quietly to thaw. "You may stop now, you know," Isolde said to him low as the breakfast drew toward its close. "You have done more than enough. You have quite saved me. No one will dare laugh at me for a 12-month. You need not keep up the pretense any longer. I could not ask it of you." Lucien looked at her for a long moment. "What," he said, "if it were no longer a pretense?" The words surprised him as much as they did her. He had not planned them. But having spoken them, he found he meant them entirely, with a completeness that rather alarmed him. "Your Grace," she began. "Lucien," he said, "if you please, I have been called Your Grace by frightened people my whole life. I should like from you to be called by my name." He set down his glass. "I came to this wedding an hour ago meaning to leave the moment courtesy permitted. I have not thought of leaving since I saw you refuse to be broken by a room that wished you broken. Isolde, I have been a solitary and a guarded man for a great many years, because I learned early that people who smile at a duke are seldom smiling at the man, and I found it simpler to be feared than to be flattered and deceived. And then I watched a woman with nothing left to lose stand straight against a crowd of cowards, and I thought, there is the only honest person in the room. And I crossed to you meaning to lend you my rank for an afternoon. I find I should like to lend it to you for considerably longer than that." Isolde had gone very still. "You cannot mean it," she said. "You have known me 2 hours, and everyone here knows I was thrown over. I am the county's cautionary tale. A duke does not marry the woman the whole world watched being jilted." "A duke," said Lucien, "does precisely as he pleases, which is the single advantage of the office, and I assure you it pleases me very much." A rare warmth touched his stern mouth. "As for knowing you 2 hours, I have known great ladies 2 years and understood them not at all. I understood you in the first 2 minutes, when you smiled for a room that wished to see you weep. That is worth more than a decade of drawing-room acquaintance. And as for being thrown over," he glanced with cold contempt toward the faithless groom, who was watching them now with an expression of dawning, dumbfounded regret. The man who threw you over is a fool who traded gold for dross and will spend his life discovering it. I do not intend to make his mistake in reverse. You are certain, Isolde whispered, that you are not doing this out of pity. I could not bear to be a duke's charity. Pity, said Lucien, does not make a man laugh twice at a wedding breakfast. Pity does not make him dread the moment a woman leaves the room. I do not pity you, Isolde Wren. I admire you, which is a far rarer thing, and I begin very much to think I could love you, which is rarer still, and which I had frankly given up expecting to feel at all. He held out his hand. Let me call upon you, properly, at your own door with all the tedious ceremony. Let what began as a pretense become the truest thing either of us has known. And let this whole gaping room understand that the woman they came to mock has been chosen by the one man in the county none of them dare to cross. She looked at his offered hand. She looked at the watching room, at her cousin, white-faced with the ruin of her spiteful little scheme, at the bride, forgotten now on her own wedding day, at the groom, staring at the woman he had discarded with the sick understanding of a man who has finally grasped the size of his error. And then Isolde Wren looked back at Lucien, and the smile she gave him this time was not for the room at all. It was only for him. Then call upon me, she said, and laid her hand in his. Lucien, though I warn you I have been made a fool of once in public, and I do not mean to be again, you had better be certain. I have never in my life been more certain of anything, he said. He did call upon her, the very next day, and the day after that, and through the whole of a courtship that scandalized and delighted the county in equal measure. The Duke of Corwenna, whom no hostess had ever tempted, was to be seen driving out with the jilted Miss Wren, sitting in her modest parlor, standing up with her at every assembly and glaring down anyone who so much as looked at her sideways. And the county, which had gathered to watch her humiliated, was made instead to watch her exalted, courted by its most feared and powerful man, transformed from cautionary tale into the envy of every drawing-room that had once whispered behind its fan. Her cousin, who had arranged the cruel invitation for sport, found herself quietly dropped from every list that mattered, for society is nothing if not swift to abandon the losing side, and no one wished to be known as the woman who had tried to shame the future Duchess of Corwenna. The faithless groom lived to see the woman he had thrown over become the greatest lady in the county, seated above his own wife at every dinner they were both obliged to attend, and if that was not justice, it was near enough to satisfy anyone who had witnessed the wedding breakfast. They were married in the spring at Corwenna, and Isolde walked up the aisle of the great chapel not as a discarded thing, but as a woman chosen, before all the world, by a man who feared nothing and had crossed a crowded hall to claim her when she had believed herself entirely alone. Lucien Vale, who had spent his life being feared, found in his wife the one person who had never once feared him, who teased him and argued with him, and made him laugh, and saw past the cold duke to the guarded man beneath, and loved that man without a particle of calculation. On their wedding day, when a guest remarked, meaning to be charming, that it was a remarkable thing the whole affair had begun as a mere pretense at another man's wedding, Lucien drew his wife's hand through his arm and answered so that the nearest could hear. It was never a pretense, he said. I told her to pretend she was mine because I could not, in that moment, think how else to say the truth, which was that from the instant I saw her refuse to be broken, I wished her to be mine in earnest. The pretense lasted the length of a whisper. Everything since has been the realest thing in my life. And Isolde, who had once stood alone in a pale yellow gown while a room laughed at her, looked up at the most feared man in the county, who was neither cold nor feared with her, and did not pretend at all.